So, a very, very warm welcome to everybody who's joined in today. I am Rushali Shaha. I am a senior research associate at the Council for Strategic and Defense Research, which is a think tank based here in New Delhi. Today, we are here as a part of the Indo-Pacific Circle. Please allow me to introduce the Indo-Pacific Circle to all of you. The Indo-Pacific Circle is a knowledge and networking platform that hosts early and mid-career scholars from the Indo-Pacific regional countries who are actively engaged in shaping the emerging narratives of the Indo-Pacific region. We are currently proud to host over 150 members from Southeast Asia, South Asia, Pacific Islands, and the Indian Ocean Island countries. Today, we have gathered to discuss the recently released ASEAN Maritime Outlook, which takes stock of the ongoing cooperation efforts undertaken by the ASEAN sectoral bodies, mechanisms, and the processes dealing with various aspects of maritime-related issues. This is, of course, a very important and much-needed endeavor for ASEAN, which undertook such a revision back in 2008. A lot, of course, has changed since then, especially with the rise of the Indo-Pacific and ASEAN's release of its own Indo-Pacific Outlook in 2019. So to discuss this, we have with us an excellent panel of experts who will be providing their insights on the ASEAN Maritime Outlook. They do not need an introduction, but I will take a minute again to introduce them anyway. We have with us Dr. Pooja Bhatt, who is the author of Nine-Line, Deciphering the South China Sea Conundrum, and is a scholar working extensively on maritime issues, particularly in the Indo-Pacific and the South China Sea. She writes on issues related to defense issues and Asian security architecture. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Bhatt. We also have with us Mr. Thong Mengdavid, who is a research supervisor at the Asian Vision Institute and is a member of the Indo-Pacific Circle. He's a lecturer at the Institute for International Studies and Public Policy, Royal University of Phnom Penh. His personal interests focus on regional security, US-China relations, ASEAN, and Mekong geopolitical studies. We also have with us Dr. Moch Faisal Karim, who's a senior lecturer in international relations at Bina Nusantara University. His primary research interests lie in the intersection of political economy and international relations, with an emphasis on the role of state institutions, state-society relations in explaining transnational issues faced by Southeast Asian countries. Once again, thank you so very much for taking the time to join us today. We're really looking forward to a very, very engaging conversation. I also welcome all our attendees today. Just some ground rules. We will be beginning with an interactive session, which will go on for about 40-45 minutes, post which we will open this up for a question and answer session. We would request you to use the chat box feature to send in your questions. I will be moderating the same, and we will be sure to raise as many questions as we want, as which will come in to make this a truly inclusive and interactive discussion. So my first question would be to all the panelists today, and I think, and it concerns the timing of the release of the ASEAN Maritime Outlook. As I mentioned, this is coming after a long gap where the previous such endeavor was taking place in 2008. So I would like to ask each of you, what do you think prompted ASEAN to undertake this measure now? If I may request Dr. Bhatt to begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Rishali and CSTAR, for having me in the afternoon today to discuss about one of my favorite issues on ASEAN and maritime issues. And we are talking with the experts on the same issue, so I cannot be gladder than this. And thank you very much for the question as well. As I see it, I don't see the timing as very sudden. It has been coming for a long time, I guess. It's after the AOIP, when it came in 2019, it was seen largely as a vision document for the region and for basically ASEAN, that what they want ASEAN, outlook for Indo-Pacific to look like, while at the same time when other other countries, major powers, if I could say, like US, Australia, and Japan, and other countries were releasing their Indo-Pacific strategies and documents. It was during the same time ASEAN suddenly dropped that document, so that was a surprising thing. But since then, it was only a question of coming up of these documents. And another thing that added to this, timing of it is again the leadership of Indonesia. a chairmanship of Indonesia right now, which allowed Indonesia being the most foremost maritime vocal provocative authority on the issue, once has been quite vocal about the issue about coming out with a maritime document. Seeing that these series of events, I think it's an opportune time that this document has come out, when we are seeing both maritime disputes as well as other non-traditional maritime threats coming on. So it's just a gradual process, and it's a good time to have this document.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Bhatt. That's extremely interesting. Dr. Karim, if I may ask you your insights on this, what do you have to say about the timing of the release of this document?
Thank you, Rusali. I think I concur with Dr. Bhatt that it's a gradual process. But one thing we should note is that how since 2008, there are so many, initiatives, there are so many forums and mechanisms put in place by ASEAN member states, but it's still fragmented. The reason for this is because every single member state of ASEAN has its own interest when it comes to maritime issue. It could be maritime economy, maritime transportation, and also maritime security. Take for example, when it comes to from 2014, we know that Indonesia has kind of a policy to sink all of the ships, deemed or allegedly coming from neighboring countries, right? So from 2014 all the way to roughly 2019, under the Ministry of Minister Susi, she was a minister of fishery back then. We can see that seems to be all of ASEAN member states have kind of a unilateral approach regarding this. So I think the reason why these documents comes out is to kind of integrate or try to make sure that all of these fragmented document, fragmented mechanism from ASEAN Maritime Forum all the way to discussion informally in ASEAN Defense Ministry, focusing on maritime can be put place into one single documents. And by doing so, I think it's also related with the as Dr. Bhatt has already mentioned, is the increasingly geopolitical tensions that requires ASEAN to be united. So this document is part of the way how ASEAN to create its own centrality, at least in the maritime cooperations that basically the hotbed of this rivalry happening in Asia or in Southeast Asia.
Thank you so much. That was indeed a very interesting observation in terms of how each Southeast Asian country has their own maritime interest, and the current approach has been fairly fragmented, and we'll come back to that. But before that, if I can ask Mr. Mengdavid to please share his insights on the timing of the release of this document.
Thank you, Ms. Saha, for your questions. For me, is that what prompts ASEAN to take this kind of measure is because, first of all, it's the fast-changing geopolitics and strategic importance of ASEAN. As we already know that ASEAN is the heart of Asia, and the world is laying their eyes on the regional bloc. So we know that since 2008 until now, there are a lot of new emerging issues, namely environment matter, suddenly recognized as urgent and got some attention within the regions. So far, marine plastics, ecotourism, blue economy, just to name a few, is have led to some discussion about this new regional initiative. So the AMO could highlight the ASEAN maritime cooperations with external dialogues partners or international organizations to alleviate these various maritime issues that often transcend geopolitical boundaries. And another key is that bound ASEAN to undertake AMO in 2023 is that the increasing challenge by the great power competition in the region, as well as the internal challenges ranging from the illegal fishings to plastic waste management and to South China Sea issue. So these both external and internal issues have forced Asians to call for mechanisms to deal with maritime issues. with multi-level and multi-sectoral institutions. So with the evolution of both threats and engagement with the oceans in mind, maritime security become a process whereby lesson learned dealing with some threats need to be thrusted into provision. There is a greater need then to understand the threat so the region can better prioritize and respond to them accordingly.
Thank you so much for that. And we will, like, you've raised a lot of important points, which we hope to dive further into during the course of this discussion. But I'd like to right now come back to Dr. Karim. And I want to know your insights on what would you identify as some of the most pressing maritime security threats which are being faced by Southeast Asian countries. And what would you assess ASEAN's response being so far in dealing with such maritime threats?
Okay, so basically, if you look at the maritime security threat, at least, yeah, we can identify roughly around 2 or 3 the most pressing issues. At least from the Indonesian perspective, would be, a growing, IUU fishing. This is one of the most important priority policy agenda for Indonesian maritime sector. How to deal with the IUU, basically. IU is not only, taking a lot of natural resources from maritime or from the sea or ocean. Is also Indonesian perspective is basically the problem in the human right issue, how the local fishermen, how the those who are working, in the ships, can be protected and all that. So I think for Indonesian perspective, the IU fishing is important. And this also relates to, I think, the reason why Indonesia voiced a lot support or mobilization of its diplomatic instrument to make sure that ASEAN Maritime Outlook can be achieved. This is because there are a lot of how to say, skirmish or to some extent disagreement among ASEAN members, resulting in a lot of skirmish between the Philippines Coast Guard and Indonesian Coast Guard with the Vietnamese Coast Guard, and it's kind of diminishing also the notion of ASEAN unity. So I think the IU fishing is one of the most pressing issue, at least from the Indonesian perspective. And secondly, obviously, the maritime terrorism, because we know that, the terrorists, there are so many sea within Southeast Asia, like in Sulu Sea, that can be a hotbed for, the terrorist groups active in Southeast Asia, to send illegal, goods, illegal weapons and all that. So that is also one of the most pressing issue, at least from traditional security side. But more importantly, is increasingly growing environmental threat. I think it's also part of the issue that ASEAN Maritime Outlook focusing on, the marine debris, and the likes of it. Marine pollution, coral reef degradation is also one of the growing important issue that ASEAN needs to look at instead of only the traditional security issue. And if you ask me about what is ASEAN response, I think it's strong response, but it's still mainly within a very limited coordination. We saw a lot of the joint patrol and exercises. Countries like Indonesia, in Malaysia and the Philippines, usually conducted joint maritime patrols. But the problem with this kind of a joint maritime patrol is kind of they patrol within their own jurisdiction, but they just patrol together. So it seems like it's not really joint in a sense that is a very integrated kind of a joint patrols because of the lack of trust probably, and so on and so forth. But at least there are kind of boots on the ground, although it's not a lot of those joint patrol, but it's there. And the ASEAN response can be seen also in the capacity building, especially collaboration with the US, with the external partners, including India when it comes to the sea within the Indian Oceans. So I think this kind of a response has been there, but it's not really integrated in a way that we would expect from ASEAN centrality.
Thank you so much for that. Mr. Mengdavid, you're joining us from Cambodia. I would request you to share your perspective on what are the pressing maritime security threats which are being faced by Southeast Asian countries, and what has ASEAN's response been to them?
Yes, first of all, I would like to highlight what we call the non-traditional issues is very quite important for the ASEAN as a whole. As we already know, that the increasing or the emergence of non-traditional issues such as transboundary crimes, transboundary illegal trafficking, the fishery, the small conflicts between states, I mean, within the ASEAN, intra-ASEAN, like Dr. Karim has mentioned earlier about the clash between the Coast Guard of our neighboring countries. So far, we have seen that ASEAN does not have very full-fledged mechanism to integrate what we call the ASEAN's maritime cooperation as a whole. Mostly we focusing on bilateral or trilateral relations, or maybe joint Coast Guard exercise, this kind of thing to tackle down this kind of a non-traditional issue. So we know that the AMO could lay out the guidelines or the blueprints to monitor the safety of ASEAN waters and the maritime commercial land. So we know that ASEAN is the heart of this maritime sea land of more than 50% of the goods and products across this South China Sea land. So these require ASEANs as a whole to put aside their difference and to come up with very strong and commitments mechanism to ensure that the implementation of these AMOs would go smooth and effectively. And we do not forget about our external partner as well. Yes, we need to include our stakeholder must be involved to implement this AMO. Yes.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Mengdavid. Dr. Bhatt, Dr. Karim raised the question of how partnership with extra-regional countries like India would be extremely helpful. What are your views on that? What role do you see India playing in maritime security in the region at large, especially with India's own embrace of the Indo-Pacific concept and a larger area being described as its area of primary interest? What is your take on this development?
Yeah, so since 2015, since we have the IMS, the Indian Navy military doctrine that has come, security doctrine that has come up, we always have considered, would have always has considered the Indian Ocean region as primary area. Fortunately, we share a lot of that area with our ASEAN members. So that also makes us share our interest as well as our challenges with these countries. So, and therefore, as we are aware, maritime interests are transnational in nature. The issues are multi-sectoral, cross-linking. So no one country can handle it by its own. However, we also know that neither of any country can come up with the solutions all alone, given their financial status, given their geoeconomic status or political status. It's not possible for the countries to come with the solutions alone. That is the reason that when AOIP came and India's own IPOI, Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative came, they sort of merged their areas of interest and areas of challenges, which somehow tend to be the same. As my previous members also mentioned, all of these countries face the issue of piracy, transnational crime, drug trafficking, IUU fishing. These are the common areas where all these countries are facing, and therefore the solution has to be common, because neither one country can come up with the solution on its own. It is in these regards, I think, the current policies of all these countries which are coming up together in terms of joint patrolling that the previous speaker also mentioned of the seas is one of the solutions. The navies and the coast guards are coming up together in terms of taking care of the maritime security aspect of it. However, the issues lie way beyond the immediate only these security threats. How we've described earlier about the maritime environment, marine ecology, plastic pollution. These are the issues which require several more agencies within these countries to come up together. What I see in this document is one of, a desire to not just bring together all the ASEAN members together in terms of their own 15 organizations, but also a desire to work with the external partners, and which opens a lot of windows for cooperation. Once you have such a statement in your hand that these are our threats, these are our challenges, these are our opportunities, it provides you a whole new blueprint to start working with your partners. And as you go through the entire document, it's a beautiful document, not only well presented but very well thought of in terms of which are the organization within ASEAN which are engaged in where maritime is one of the important vertical that is coming up, in what areas what are documents they are cooperating, what are the areas of cooperation, what are the activities being. I think this is a very comprehensive document which allows for a lot of space for cooperation between India and ASEAN countries and other external partners as well, where they can come up with the funding aspect, which I believe is a more important aspect, that countries who have the capacities and countries who have the fundings, they can come up with the fundings, and countries like India and ASEAN which require these fundings in their own domestic ways, in their own country specific way, they can come up and use, because no one solution will fit all. We have to consider this also. One of the issue of fragmentation within ASEAN is that we always try and impose one solution for all the countries, which more or less does not always work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Bhatt. And might I add, it's a very crisp document which lays it out so beautifully and it sends the message across very well. So thank you so much for that observation. Mr. Mengdavid, you spoke about blue economy as well, which is, of course, as you correctly pointed out, highlighted throughout the document. I would like to ask you about your views on how you view ASEAN embracing this concept of blue economy as a means of promoting sustainable growth and development.
So thank you, Ms. Saha, for the question. So we know that the ASEAN's Blue Economic Framework is a blueprint to set out a cross-cutting concept in advancing economy, prosperity, and facilitating value-created resiliencies, inclusivity, and sustainability for the ASEAN as a whole. So the document will be set to be endorsed by the ASEAN leaders in the upcoming 43rd ASEAN Summit in September this year. So when talking about sustainable growth and development, we have to put into a consideration of the element of prosperity, inclusivity, resilience, and people-centric development. So these are the core that make the concept of the ASEAN Blue Economy. So far we have mentioned about the ASEAN fragmentations, this kind of all things in ASEAN. So we know that these key elements, unity and collaboration among ASEANs, are the only key to unlock ASEAN's full potentials to confront the global geopolitics and geo-economics challenges, and to work together to build a blue economic frameworks in establishing blue economic related research and policy strategies, this kind of other thing. So ASEAN also has tracked down a lot of intra and external challenges that are harmful to the regional cooperation and welfare of the people. For example, the climate change, the maritime security, and waste pollution, and so on. And one more key aspect of the challenge is that one more key aspect that promotes sustainable growth and development in ASEAN is the participation of the key dialogue partners such as India, China, EU, United States, and many more, in which those partners have been playing crucial roles in addressing maritime issues and actively engaging with ASEAN in implementing regulations and investing in infrastructures and capacity building initiatives that could advance the blue economy agendas in the region. So we have to wait and see what is going next in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Dr. Karim, my next question would be for you. And I want to ask you your views on how do you see ASEAN Maritime Outlook dealing with the ongoing territorial and jurisdictional disputes which are taking place in the South China Sea, which has been, of course, a historic dispute. Does it address the issue? And also, if you could share your insights on whether ASEAN has sort of learned any lessons from its mediation efforts in the South China conflict. See, what is happening? What is ASEAN's role in this?
Okay, so again, the issue at really the core of maritime cooperation is basically the elephant in the room. I would suggest is the South China Sea conflict, because since late 90s, yeah, ASEAN always try to create a code of conduct, yeah, multilaterally. It's not gonna be bilaterally with China, and the growing might of China, yeah, change the geopolitical and also geoeconomic realities in the ground. And it seems ASEAN upper hand, so to speak, regarding China seemingly decreasing. We can see, the salami tactic made by China when it comes to disunify ASEAN seems to be successful. Some of ASEAN member states kind of embrace, yeah, China agenda in the region, while others, yeah, seems to be neutral in position, while the rest, some of them like Vietnam, yeah, Singapore, and to some extent Indonesia seems to be more wary about that. So I think when it comes to cooperation again, that ASEAN try to put in place through this ASEAN Maritime Outlook is basically to enhance, yeah, its ideational capability, because we know that before the coming of ASEAN Maritime Outlook, ASEAN has tried to put forward the notions of UNCLOS, right? Using the legality, right? Some of the countries like Philippines even goes to, arbitrary tribunal, yeah, in order to make sure that the legal claim of China in South China Sea has no basis at all. So in this case, I would suggest, or probably my suspect is that ASEAN Maritime Outlook also, of course, it's a comprehensive, ranging from non-traditional security all the way to environmental issue, basically a part of ongoing efforts by ASEAN, yeah, to make sure that they have a unity when it comes to strategy regarding maritime cooperation among themselves and also with the external powers, and having that same outlook, at least in normative level or ideational level, it enables to put China or any other external powers on board when it comes to ASEAN roles in making sure that the maritime sectors is peaceful and can be utilized for all benefit. That is the reason why you touch upon the blue economy is one of the most important aspect that being put forward in this outlook, because at the end of the day, it's all about creating the benefit, yeah, especially in ZEE, AEEZ, yeah, area for all of the member states and including the external power. So the underpinning idea, I would argue, in ASEAN Maritime Outlook is basically how ASEAN not only address the jurisdictional dispute, which is having a lot of mechanisms already put in place, but more creating a same a front for all of the ASEAN members to address this challenge, especially in South China Sea. Even though if you look at the document, it's not really directly discussing that, but I think it's kind of an ideational underpinning of the lack of ASEAN unity when it comes to dealing or creating code of conduct in South China Sea.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Karim. Dr. Bhatt, my next question would be for you. And if we could take the discussion back to sort of like the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, how would you see this maritime outlook complementing the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific? Does this reflect a greater desire amongst ASEAN countries to assert their presence in this Indo-Pacific region?
Sorry,
Yes. So I don't need to mention out, but the document by itself beautifully mentions that the ASEAN Maritime document, this current document dovetails the AOIP document. So in a sense, it establishes by itself that the AOI ASEAN Outlook was the vision document which actually proposed how ASEAN wants the maritime domain to look like, whereas the ASEAN Maritime Outlook document, which is coming, which we are discussing right now, is more of details in pieces. So basically, it talks about the processes, the details, the management of how they want to go about, what institutions would be involved. So they have gone into real details of the entire issue. One of the issue that during the discussion that has come up is also how ASEAN is fragmented when it comes to maritime issue. I would like to see it in this way. ASEAN is fragmented on the issues, basically. It's not that they are entirely on everything on maritime issue, they do not see eye to eye. So there are issues of threats where how my previous speaker also mentioned about it's a China factor, the South China Sea factor. The countries who have the claims on that region, they have different set of urgency in terms of maritime issues, threats and issues. However, there are other countries which have their maritime concerns, such as the transnational maritime crimes. You have piracy, and you have the climate related, marine ecology related issues. So these are the issues where most of the ASEAN countries have come together. What I see in this document very clearly is ASEAN has tried to start building up cooperation based on issues of convergences. Most of the issues which are mentioned in the document very clearly show the coherence amongst all the countries. They are those issues where all the countries agree that these are the issues not just faced by one but by everyone. I think this is the bare minimum, lowest common denominator when it comes to cooperation for the ASEAN members to come together and cooperate on the maritime security. Once that is established, I think how my previous member was mentioning that it's the South China Sea issue where countries do not come together. And I think once these issues starts get the non-traditional issue gets resolving and start seeing more cooperation towards each other, I think the COC code of conduct and DOC declaration of would see more coherence in that term. Currently, I think there kind of friction not between the ASEAN countries and China on the other hand, but also within the ASEAN members when it comes to DOC negotiations. So I think with this document, we have, as I previously mentioned, there is a blueprint with the lowest common denominators, common agendas, common issues, countries to come together. And once that basic understanding is set, there is the next level of taking, more important issues might come up later.
Right. Thank you so much for that. I just want to take a minute to request the participants, if they have any questions, to please use the question and answer box on your screen to start dropping in your questions. I will be collecting them and sharing them with our panelists. For now, I'd like to move on to Mr. Mengdavid. Mr. Mengdavid, the ASEAN Maritime Outlook mentions that it looks to build strategic trust and facilitate win-win cooperation in the region. Can you share your insights on how ASEAN defines this strategic trust, and why is it important, or like in terms of being a fundamental principle to promote stability and cooperation in the region? And how do you see this Outlook document building towards that strategic trust?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Saha, for the question. Is that we need to understand and know that the ASEANs, amidst the involving multifaceted and decentralized world, weak states actors are compelled to regularly and robustly revisit and readjust their foreign policy based on their national interests. So ASEAN as a whole. So we can see that these are the main causes of the ASEAN disunity and fragmentation. So ASEAN as a whole, we do have share our regional interests, common interests, which are focusing on prosperous, security, peace, etc., and so on. However, by promoting and enhancing the three main ASEAN pillars, are the key to build strategic trust and facilitate the win-win cooperations in the regions. So by adhering to the core principle of ASEAN centrality and the ASEAN ways, as well as promoting the external cooperation with dialogue partners through the TAC and the other ASEAN regional forums, ASEAN can navigate this volatile storm through of regional challenges build confidence, and promoting preventive diplomacy. So these are the core value of the ASEAN centralities. So we already know that the ASEAN does not have any like full-fledged sectoral ministerial body that dedicated to the maritime affair, and most of the maritime cooperation is widely done through bilateral agreement between some ASEAN member states, such as Cambodia, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Indonesia with the Philippines, Indonesia with the Malaysia, this kind of all thing. So we do not have this kind of the ministerial level cooperation, this kind of thing to tackle down or to address the maritime issue. So is that AMO could facilitate the intra and regional cooperations with sub-regional body. For example, Indian Ocean Rims Associations, the Bay of Bengal Initiative for sectoral technical and economic cooperations, and the Brunei, Darussalam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, East Asian Gulf areas. So these kind of sub-regional mechanism or initiatives could enforce or enhance the cooperations among ASEAN member states in maintaining and to ensure the safety of the maritime cooperations. So furthermore, we know that the Indo-Pacific has seen an advance of mini-lateral groupings that seek to advocate maritime issues, for example, the Quads and the AUKUS. So they involve a lot of like major power, for example, United States, Japan, and India as a whole, and Australia as well. So we need to also consider both traditional and non-traditional issues, that these issues will affect and cause harm to the region as a whole, not just individual ASEAN member states.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Mengdavid. Dr. Karim, if I can place this question to you as well, since you spoke about mistrust between ASEAN countries as being a hindrance. So do you see this maritime outlook contributing towards strategic trust and win-win cooperation, which it has outlined as its objective in the document? What are your views on this? You're on mute, Dr. Karim.
Yeah, I think this document shows that at the end of the day, ASEAN needs to create its own kind of a principles. You know that Indo-Pacific, yeah, kind of a idea from India or from Japan, emphasizing on rule-based, right? Rule-based order, which to some extent kind of exclusively specifically exclude China to some extent, right? But if you look at the principle of ASEAN Maritime Outlook, it kind of incorporate both the notions of the rule-based network. So ASEAN Maritime Outlook emphasize the important rule-based, just like outlook from India, Japan, Australia, and the US regarding how the maritime issue should be dealt with. But it also tried to incorporate the notions of openness, inclusivity, and more importantly, respect for sovereignty and non-intervention, one of the key important ASEAN value or ASEAN way. So in a way, these documents allows ASEAN to create a more trust both to its external partners, be it China, that that ASEAN say it's going to be transparent, open, and inclusive, and also emphasizing the importance of rule-based order or framework that becoming important, especially from India, Japan, Australia, and the US. So in this sense, I think the documents show that, just like you've already said, a way for ASEAN to open up and then to say, okay, this is this time for us to talk all together regarding the maritime issue. It's not going to be on this security issue. It's going to be comprehensive. And by doing so, it can incorporate all of the national security agenda or interest of all partners of ASEAN and also ASEAN member states. And then we can talk more about the pressing issues altogether. So I think in this sense, it's kind of a good step for ASEAN to maintain again its ASEAN centrality, but also incorporate those value that all external powers adhere to.
Right. Thank you so much for that. With this, we'll start the question and answer session now. We have quite a few questions which have come in. The first question is that what learnings can India take away with developing a similar document with BIMSTEC or other organizations like IORA and Quad? And how can India expand its global leadership in the Indo-Pacific affairs, especially as a balancing power between US and China? Dr. Bhatt, if I may request you to take this question.
Yeah, quite a controversial question. Okay, okay, try and answer it without ruffling too many feathers. Uh, it's a good suggestion that BIMSTEC should be also looking at making such a kind of document, because maritime cooperation connectivity is also a very crucial pillar when it comes to BIMSTEC negotiation. And if you see all of the working groups, somewhere or other, we have the maritime component in those groups. So it is a very good precedence to take, basically, for other regional organizations such as BIMSTEC to follow. So I think it's a very workable idea. For this, again, the countries of the BIMSTECs have to sit down, talk together, exchange their views on threats, challenges, what mechanisms are available. So just as this document, how it is beautifully and explained everything, I think this is a very good learning to take away for BIMSTEC. Secondly, how can India be a global leader? I do not. Okay, so this is the thing. I do not think, from my perspective, that India wants to be a global leader, as just and be a wedge between US and China. But however, what it is trying to do is bring together the voices of the countries in the global South. And why I would say that, because all of these documents never talk about that India wants to be a global power, India wants to do something. It wants to bring together other countries also. So when we talk about Quad being against these so Quad, basically, if you see, it started flourishing when became more broadened in its approach when it comes to security. Till the time, it was very narrow in terms of looking only military security in the region. We did not see much cooperation coming up. But the moment Quad expanded its horizon and security became more broad, bringing in climate security, HADR, and other things, Quads automatically started getting more acceptance, not just by the within the Quad members, but regional members as well. Similarly, if you talk about IORA is again finding its footing, because till now we never had a very strong view towards maritime and IORA related issues. But now the similar approach towards maritime. So all these institutions are building parallel mechanisms. If you go and read them out, they have the parallel viewpoints toward the maritime issues. Sometimes this is so much so that I believe we are just having too many institutions for the same causes, and we are just wasting too much resources. Why not then cross connect them? You have fundings coming to each of the organization, and we are fighting for the same causes. Might as well just cross connect within yourself in terms of mechanisms, in terms of finances, and that might work more effectively rather than other. So that would be my answer.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Bhatt. Our next question is from Siddharth Nair, who asks that the latest outlook covers climate change comprehensively. Do the panelists foresee the introduction of climate security as an aspect of ASEAN's outlook? If so, how? And what challenges do you think such an introduction may face? Dr. Karim, if I may ask you to begin with this, and then we can ask each of the panelists to take on the question.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Nair. So yeah, you're right. Climate. If you look at the documents, there are so many issues related with climate has been put forward within the context of addressing climate or mitigating climate change issue. If you ask me whether the notion of climate security is feasible, I think the notion has been discussed in several meetings, especially in ASEAN Defense Ministerial Meeting. It's an informal meeting among ASEAN defense ministers. And the notions of the climate security has also been part of the discussion of military operation other than war, the kind of a new concept in Indonesian military. So I think the notions of how climate induce security issue, whether it's a resilient issue or defense issue or sovereignty issue, has been pretty much discussed in several mechanisms within ASEAN. But indeed, I don't think it has been incorporated yet, because the notion itself is still kind of been debated. How can ASEAN have the same outlook? But the notion has been around in the discussion, especially in a security or defense related fora.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Karim. Mr. Mengdavid, if I may request you to share your insights on this.
You mean on this climate
This
security?
question of I can repeat the question once again. It says that the latest outlook covers climate change comprehensively. Do you foresee the introduction of climate security as an aspect of ASEAN's outlook? If so, how? And what challenges do you think such an introduction may face?
So as we already know that the ASEAN has been actively engaged with the climate change, securities, this kind of all thing. Yet we have a lot of meetings to discuss about how and to solve the problems through various mechanisms, bilaterally, regionally, and also with our external partners as well. So the threats caused by climate change is real. We can see it is real. For example, if the climate change or the temperature keep rising, we can see the ice in the pole will trying to melt, and then there's flood. Because we know that in some ASEAN countries there are islands, and for example the increasing of seawater level may decrease the fertility soils in Vietnam, in other part of the ASEAN country. So this cause a lot of like problem like food security, and also harmful to the development of the ASEAN as a whole. So climate security must be addressed in the ASEAN and in other discussion, because we need to acknowledge that the risk is real and it's time to act. We cannot wait the other like the global power to lead this kind of thing. ASEAN, we can also try to find the other way, or we can come up together with this kind of the ASEAN security or the ASEAN climate change initiatives in order to reduce the destruction or the mitigate the risk caused by the climate change. For example, the carbon emission, to cut down carbon emissions, deforestation, or this kind of other thing we can do a lot of together as the ASEAN.
Thank you so much for that. The next question is from Palak Vyas. It says, is there a strategy in place on how to counter China's gray zone activities by the ASEAN members? Are they expecting participation from actors like India to counter Chinese gray zone activities in Southeast Asia? Dr. Bhatt, I see that smile on your face. If I can request you to first take this question, and then we take it to our other two panelists as well.
Yes, this is indeed again an interesting question. So yes, if you recall, recently, just 2 days back, we had this India-Philippines postcard cooperation on white shipping. And why this is crucial is white shipping agreements basically are signed to create transparency about the marine traffic, marine vessels, maritime vessels. So you have commercial vessels, and these vessels are always tracked by and the data is exchanged. This in turn is a small step towards mitigating the gray zone activities. We have a lot of those vessels and roaming around in the Indian Ocean region and beyond, which are not reported. Basically their AIS is not on, and therefore they are able to do a lot of gray zone activities. I think small steps such as these between the countries will go a long way, and it's just one of the example. I'm sure a lot of other agreements are in the place or right now going on in terms of creating these small mechanisms in terms of for addressing the gray zone activities that China is doing in the waters. This would be the Indian perspective. I'm sure my ASEAN friends would have more to tell about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Dr. Karim, if I may ask your perspectives on this.
Okay, I think to some extent, many ASEAN countries, especially from Indonesian perspective, seems to downplay or denial when it comes to Beijing increasingly, assertive actions or the way how China employ gray zone tactics. Somehow, Indonesia always say it's not a claimant state in a dispute, even though China mobilizing, its fishing vessels, yeah, sometimes accompanied by, coast guards, going to, in a maritime territory of ASEAN countries. Seems like, Indonesia since 2019 seems to downplay those things. So I think in the case of whether, the use of external powers by ASEAN member states to kind of leverage or to kind of a balancing China to some extent, it might be one of the strategy pursued to some extent by many ASEAN countries. I cannot speak for other ASEAN countries, but at least in terms of Indonesia and India, there are increasingly joint exercises and patrols, and also a kind of a cooperation. I think there are talks. Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's already been implemented or not, about having kind of a closer cooperation between navies in Indonesia and in India near the Andaman Sea. Yeah, especially in Aceh and the tip of Indonesian island of Sumatra in Aceh. So there is a kind of a way of Indonesia to create a more cultural tie with India and maritime cooperation. So in a way, it may not be directly try to balancing China gray zone activities or tactics, but to some extent, we can see from helicopter view that making sure that other external powers, part of the governance or part of the order in Southeast Asia or in this maritime issue, seems to be one of the strategy pursued by several ASEAN member states.
Right. And would you say that there is expectation from countries like India to counter such gray zone activities?
I think in a way that by incorporating, by making sure that other external powers, part of the governance or the order, seems to make sure that to some extent, yeah, it's not going to be directly challenge China in that region, but more telling China that this is an open sea. We can have a more closer cooperation with others if you don't want to cooperate. So in a way, it's kind of a leverage for at least for ASEAN, that you're not only the player in town, right? There are other players that willing to be part of the rule base, willing to be part of the ASEAN vision or ASEAN centrality. So in that sense, it might be the way how Indonesia or ASEAN member state try to pursue, even though we don't really know to what extent such leverage really can push China to be more cooperative instead of using a gray zone tactics, but at least it's one of the strategy pursued.
Thank you so much. Mr. Mengdavid, if I may request you to share your insights.
Regarding to this kind of strategy by using the other state to counter other state, from Cambodia perspective, is that Cambodia does not support any state to come and counter other states, because we know, right, when we are using one big state and to counter another big state is not a good idea, especially for the ASEAN as a whole, as we know that ASEAN each have their own interests and foreign policy to engage with all external partners, right? For example, in political, in economy, in diplomatic, and also this kind of all regional institutions. So we know that using the word counter is kind of a little bit a threat, right? When using something to counter a threat, but that's what we can see, that between China, does China is a threat to ASEAN. So it depends on each ASEAN member state perceive China. So we know that in some cases, because for Cambodia is not a claimant state in the South China Sea, but we are living in the ASEAN regional blocks. So Cambodia well as a member state does not support any particular direct confrontation between any particular states in the region because it could promote armed races, promote more fragmented, and also promote insecurity in the regions. We know that ASEAN, US, India, EU, these countries are the main trading partner in ASEAN. So like Dr. Karim said, we just want to tell everyone is that you come here in peace, you come here to invest, you come here to make us progress, and we provide you with a win-win benefit together. So it's that we can promote these regions as a sea of peace and sea of prosperity. So by trying to graph any strategy, it will produce more like cyclical ideology encountering of what we can say the Cold War mentality in the region because ASEAN does not want that. We only want cooperation between all other states in the regions. And we also support the rule-based international system. So if we have any problem, we can use international laws or we can use any particular bilateral or multilateral engagement and promote peaceful settlement.
Right. Thank you so much for that. We have a very interesting question from Kanisa, who is joining us from BRI in Indonesia. The question is that maritime issues in ASEAN is usually discussed in high politics. How do the panelists see the role of coastal societies in building ASEAN's maritime capabilities? Dr. Bhatt, if I may ask you to take this question.
Yes, I totally believe when it comes to issues of cooperation, I think it has to be the bottoms up approach rather than a top down approach, because high politics has limited role to play beyond a point. It's the societies that are affected by these issues. So coastal societies, in terms of because they are the ones who are most affected by the any impact of, you know, whether you talk about threats, you talk about wars, you talk about conflicts, you talk about weather change, you talk about rising sea levels. The coastal societies would be the first one to be affected. I think uh, first of all, the knowledge creation by these coastal societies is very important. Each of these coastal societies are the powerhouse of traditional knowledge in terms of how to safeguard, you know, the marine systems for the generations all along. These coastal societies have been living in harmony with water. They know their engagements with seas and ocean better than anyone else. I think to start with these coastal societies, we need to reach out to these coastal societies to develop that kind of traditional knowledge that they have gained through generations. And I think we'll find a lot of solutions to our current problems that we are talking about in maritime issues, including maritime outlook, to from these traditional knowledge. I think that has to be the first step to find out. Later on, I think these coastal societies can be also incorporated when it comes to the working groups, you know, small level working groups, because they will bring the original insights to these, you know, otherwise political bureaucratic systems. And having first-hand insights is always helpful in making more effective and proactive policies. I think this way we can really reach out and get benefited from the coastal societies, their knowledge and their presence.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bhatt. Dr. Karim, if you have any insights on this.
Yeah, I think just a quick response to Ibu Khadija. So basically, I agree with that because ASEAN Maritime Cooperation basically try to emphasize on the people-centered, right? Because of the lack of uh, civil society or indigenous or in this case coastal society play in a policy making. So indeed, this is always a debate about whether ASEAN is the people center or ASEAN is basically a capital city issue to some extent. But I agree. If you ask me how basically coastal society can play a role when it comes to maritime capability. So basically, at the end of the day, I agree with Dr. Bhatt. When it comes to blue economy, for instance, if ASEAN wanted to invest a lot in creating blue economy, they will basically need to engage, you know, the coastal society, because that is the way or where they make a living. So when we need to make sure that every investment in tourism, for instance, or creating a new industrial spot in their area will not uh, uh, disturb their way of living, but at the same time can enhance the notion of blue economy. That is for sure. And secondly, I think I agree with Dr. Bhatt. It's basically about how they or this coastal society also part of the maritime or stakeholder of maritime security, because sometimes the the skirmish between the maritime or coastal society or fishermen, yeah, with the Chinese Coast Guard or any other ASEAN member state Coast Guard is always the front line would be this coastal society, these fishermen. They get caught in between the conflict. So making sure that they are also part of the stakeholder is important. Nonetheless, when it comes to piracy or illegal activities happening in the sea, it's always the coastal society that engage first. So having them become eyes and ears, for instance, for suspicious activities or I don't know, probably grassroots level of surveillance, for instance, yeah, it would be also part of the the role of civil or coastal society in ASEAN maritime capability, because given the lack of military infrastructure or navy infrastructure in ASEAN, I think they becomes increasingly important. I think, yeah, that's two things that I can think of.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Mr. Mengdavid.
For me, I think people-centric, inclusive, and sustainable developments and protections at the core value that ASEAN needs to emphasize or stress the importance on their livelihood. Like I concur with our two panelists that talking about their roles and responsibility in promoting the state or national economy. So we know that when there is happen or there's any problem or issue, they are the first who will feel the impacts of the change, or maybe are the one who face the consequences, for example, the climate change, the clash between the coast guards, this kind of all these things. So we need to respect their rights to live and also to promote and to ensure that their life are protected, because they are the one who does not have anything to protect themselves. So the state should pay much attention or pay much protection on their livelihood, especially their society, because they are the one who easily get impacted or from any disagreement or any conflicts between the region.
Right. Thank you so much. I would ask the panelists if they have time for one more question, which has come in. If I can place that to you.
Yeah.
Great. This question is from Dr. Shampa Kundu. She says that geographically, the ASEAN region has countries which are landlocked. How do you view the role and position of those countries in the maritime domain? And does the ASEAN Maritime Outlook address those issues, taking into consideration their perspectives? Dr. Karim, if I may request you to begin.
Yeah, thank you. So I think, again, for those landlocked ASEAN countries, I think Laos is one of those. Yeah, it seems to me that I don't think this maritime outlook emphasize more on their voice to some extent, because ASEAN Maritime Outlook is more about how ASEAN as a whole try to utilize its maritime domain to enhance its integration, security, and so on and so forth. And some of the countries in ASEAN push forward the idea. So I think in that sense, those countries who are not really a maritime country may not really have ideas or ideas in this issue, but it doesn't mean that their roles and position has been less compared with other countries, because at the end of the day, the issue of ASEAN Maritime Outlook is not only about the maritime related, but also a broader issue such as climate change, such as integration, the role of sea lane of communications that to some extent also impacted the landlocked countries in ASEAN. I think that's my take.
Thank you so much. Mr. Mengdavid.
For me, I think even though some Asian member states, I think only Laos is the landlocked country in ASEAN member state, even though within their military, they do have the navy. So we can see that even though Laos does not have any access to the sea lands or to the oceans, however, Laos economy also depended, or their interests also depend on the maritime security as well. So we know that a lot of trading activity is through the ocean. So Laos economy, trades and commercial trading partner also come from the sea as well. So more or less, they still Laos still consider it as a very important document for them as well, because to ensure the peaceful and stable commercial maritime commercial, this kind of thing would also benefit them as well, even though they do not have access to sea or to the oceans. And another thing is that the ASEAN is established based on consensus based. So more or less, Laos still has one voice in any particular document signing or any joint statement. So Laos still have a voice in promoting this kind of ASEAN Maritime Outlook, even though Laos does not have the oceans or the waterway.
Thank you so much. Dr. Bhatt, over to you.
Yes, I completely agree with my previous two speakers. Except Laos, we have all the countries in ASEAN which has some kind of coastal frontage, So I think seeing from that perspective, this document actually covers the 90% of those ASEAN countries, and I think it speaks for 90%. Moreover, it's not a country-specific document. It has to be seen as issue-specific document, and these are issues are common to all. As my previous speaker also mentioned, even though Laos does not have, coastal frontage, it does have a navy. It's trade. It does have trade, which comes from the seas, and also any kind of climate change activities is going to affect Laos as well. So I think we have to see it from that perspective, and it's in the end, it's a consensus-based document. So therefore, any of Laos' voice has been definitely represented in this document.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That brings us to the end of this webinar. My apologies to some of the questions which I was not able to address, but we are running out of time. We've already extended it by 10 minutes. So I take this opportunity to thank all our panelists for joining us today. I know how busy your schedules are, but I really appreciate the time that you took out to join this webinar. I personally enjoyed it a lot, and I think I speak on behalf of even our audience members here that it was a great learning experience. And thank you so much for making it so interactive and a great learning opportunity for all of us. I'll also take a minute to thank the team at IPC and at CSDR for providing the support to carry on with the webinar and the activities that IPC is conducting. Thank you so much for your support. With that, I will close the webinar now and thank all our audience members also for joining in. And we will hope that you join us again for our future webinars. We'll post our members and use our social media platforms to inform you of our future events. And once again, thank you so very much. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Rosalie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.